always in these times, it's computer and digital platform issues. However, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'm happy to welcome you to the second day of our symposium, the IMO Symposium on Alternative Low Carbon and Zero Carbon Fuels for Shipping. We had a very exciting and very informative, useful day yesterday, and I have looked into the program for today. I'm confident that we will experience the same today as well. Let me start by also in presenting myself. My name is Sveinung Oftedal. I'm from the Norwegian Ministry of Climate and Environment, for those who do not know me from prior times, and I'm involved with IMO work at the MEPC and environmental issues. Now, first I will provide you with some key practical information. When the presenters today deliver their presentation, the Q&A function will be open. So if you have any questions regarding their presentations, please provide your questions in the Q&A function. Present who you are and who your question is directed to, and then we will pick up those questions after all the presentations on the two blocks we will have today, and then we can have a dialogue on the basis of those questions. To the presenters, you are already informed that you have been allocated 10 minutes for your presentation, and I know that you have quite much information you want to deliver to the audience we have here today. However, please respect the 10 minutes, which was done yesterday, and then everything went smooth and fine. So please do that today as well. And finally, I should inform you that in addition to be here on the Zoom platform, this is also being broadcasted on the IMO YouTube channel. This also yesterday had good participation, so this will take place today as well. Now, let's move to the business of today, and start by having presentations on the block number 3 of the symposium. Block 3 is providing alternative fuels, building the supply chain and required infrastructure, state of play of preparing for use of alternative fuels in the wider maritime industry. So we have 5 presentations on these elements, and this is a very important block, simply also because if ship owners gonna use other types of fuels than the normal one, there needs to be a fuel supply. We will start with inviting Mr. Peter Alkemer of the Port of Amsterdam, which is also the chair of the IAPH working group on clean marine fuels, to share lessons learned from the LNG bunkering and for bio-LNG and other alternative fuels. And I will now give the floor to Mr. Alkemer. You have the floor, please.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I will share my screen. And I assume that you are now seeing my screen. Am I correct?
You are correct. We can see your screen.
Thank you very much. There's actually a helicopter circulating above my hometown, and I hope it's not too disturbing. My name is Peter Alkemer. I work for the Port of Amsterdam Authority, and I also have the honor to chair the working group on clean marine fuels within the International Association of Ports and Harbors. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you a bit more about our experiences with LNG and our work for the upcoming fuels. Well, as we've seen in presentations from speakers yesterday, the marine fuel mix definitely has started to shift and will be much more diverse the coming decade. At this point, LNG is becoming mainstream and other energy sources are heading our way. Compared to conventional fuels, most of the new fuels have higher risk and therefore also require a much higher level of vessel and port safety management with respect to handling of the fuel, especially when it comes to bunker operations. This is challenging for ports as existing safety frameworks have to be adjusted. Today, I hope to show you that CMF Working Group is driven to advance the fuel transition by helping the industry to adjust those frameworks. Doing so, I will briefly go over what we are as a group and what we do, the challenges a port faces considering new marine fuels, and our planning for the near future based on our experiences with LNG. So who are we and what do we do? The CMF Working Group started off in 2012 and has ever since been working on tools to facilitate the safe bunkering of LNG. And since 2017, we have a focus on all new clean marine fuels. Members of the working group are from port authorities all around the world. They are advisors, engineers, specialists who have good insights on the impact of new marine fuels to the ship-port interface. Our mission is to empower ports to facilitate and stimulate and regulate the supply of new fuels by providing our expertise and guidance. So it's our goal to achieve that by 2030, the supply of new clean marine fuels in ports has become common practice using the tools we provide. There's a challenge, however. There's a lot of work to be done on the infrastructure and safety management in ports. When the handling of fuels has higher risks, also high quality safety management is required. On this slide, you'll get an insight of what the port needs to consider upon the implementation of a bunker fuel. As you may see, there's actually quite a lot of work to be arranged from a safety perspective. This is where I'd like to focus on today. As CMF, we provide the maritime industry with 3 instruments to implement the required levels of safety management. Instruments like audit and guidance tools. Frontrunner ports in our working group are happy to share their experiences, and they do so via the World Port Sustainability Program website. And as IPH and CMF, we cooperate with other initiatives in the industry. For example, the World Ports Climate Action Program, the Getting to Zero Coalition, and in the near future, the Green Forest 2050. To overcome the challenge, CMF has created a port safety management framework in order to harmonize safety management levels between ship and bunker facility, to allocate safe bunker locations and to prepare terminals for new fuels. This diagram represents the framework in which we arrange for the high quality safety management on 3 levels. First of all the way on the left, you can see the system safety level. On this level, we ensure that the responsibilities of the bunker facility operator are clearly defined and that at the front end, careful consideration is given to the way bunker operations are organized. We provide this audit tool to audit the safety management system of a bunker facility operator on several system criteria, including training and competence, resources, maintenance, optimal bunker preparation, safe operations, and aftercare. Based on the audit, a designated authority may issue a bunker operator license. On this level, terminals are also prepared on a system level. For this, CMF provides the fuel-ready terminal guidance tool. It may be used by ports to initiate the preparedness of terminals for safe cargo handling of vessels with new types of fuels and safe ship-to-ship LNG bunkering along their berth. Also, on an operational level, we ensure harmonization of operational safety of all the bunker process involved parties. On this level, we provide the bunker checklists, which have already been in use since 2013 for LNG, truck to ship, ship to ship, and station to ship. Terminals are also involved on an operational level, and CMF provides the terminal information sheet, which is part of the bunker checklists. And then we come to spatial allocation. And this is quite important. Often based on national legislation, a port authority may have to decide at which locations bunker operations in a port area are permitted, taking into account, among other things, the spatial planning of the port, risk analysis for external safety and nautical safety. For CMF, it's rather hard to develop generic support for this safety level. We are, however, aiming to provide guidance in the port guidance tool we work on. For some ports, it may become the hardest challenge for new fuels, where may the port allow bunker operation looking at the risks for the surrounding area. External safety is about risk to the surrounding area when handling hazardous substances, which most of the new fuels actually are. On this slide below, you see the LNG bunkering map for the Port of Amsterdam. It's based on external safety research. Based on quantitative risk analysis, we have assigned bunker locations in the port. This is not something unique. Port of Rotterdam has done the same, for instance, and I'm convinced that other authorities in countries around the world do likewise for LNG and new fuels. As Port of Amsterdam, we also recently initiated a study on the risk of new fuels, including methanol, hydrogen in several states, and ammonia in several states. And although the results are still preliminary, we did already find that for some fuels, it's going to be, again, to say the least, challenging at some locations in the port. That brings me back to the available instruments we have. This table actually shows the lessons we've learned from LNG. The total package of tools for LNG was completed in September 2020 with the release of the LNG Terminal Ready tool. We consider our LNG tool package as blueprints for the new upcoming fuels. So let's see where we are working on. Actually, on a system level, we're trying to make generic tools of all the tools we have for LNG. The outer tool has to become generic for all fuels, and also the LNG Ready Terminal tool. On an operational level, we've been starting to work on checklists for new fuels. For instance, a truck-to-ship cryogene checklist for both LNG and hydrogen. Also for methanol, we're developing a flammable and or toxic liquid checklist for truck-to-ship operations. I'm sure that the slides will be shared, so I won't go into detail on all the other tools. That brings me to my last slide. The shift towards new marine fuels brings challenges for ports. High-level, high-quality safety management is required for the new fuels that are now under consideration, both on the vessel and port side. Ports are working hard to overcome these challenges, and the IPH Working Group on Clean Marine Fuels continues to develop instruments that support improving existing bunker safety frameworks in ports. When it comes to the IMO strategy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, cooperation in the industry is essential. In this, I think it's fair to expect that IMO, as well as IPH, have a role in stimulating the cooperation for the implementation of high-quality bunker safety management. More information on our tools can be found on our website, including videos and guidance documents. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alkmaar, for a very concise presentation and for sharing your experience on what you are doing in the port of Amsterdam. And I want to remind participants that in the Q&A function, which you can find on the lower bar or on your screen, please, you can provide questions to Mr. Alkmaar. And I'm sure he will respond afterwards. So then we will continue with the next presentation to be delivered by Ms. Linda Hammer from DNV GL to share her views on the transition to zero emission solutions for shipping in Norway. Ms. Hammer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good day to all. I will start by sharing my screen. I hope you can see it now.
We can see it, so please continue, yes.
Thank you. I'm pleased to share some experiences from the transition to zero emission solutions for shipping in Norway. Public procurement requiring low and zero emission technologies and innovation procurement has been essential in the transition to zero emission solutions in the public ferry sector in Norway. And support schemes such as the NOx Fund and Enova has also made important contributions to realizing low and zero emission solutions in Norway. It started with the introduction of LNG as fuel in the public ferry sector and in offshore supply vessels operating in the North Sea 20 years ago, paving the way for introduction of LNG as fuel in other ship types in short sea shipping and maturing the technology for global deep sea shipping. The electrification of the public ferry sector started in 2015. Some of the ferries are full electric, others are hybrid solutions where diesel or biofuels are used to extend the operating range. We also see uptake of batteries in other ship types, mostly offshore supply vessels. The next step in the transition to zero emission solutions for the Norwegian public ferry sector is the introduction of hydrogenous fuel. To make also this technology scalable, the first ferry operating on hydrogen will store the hydrogen in its liquefied form. The supply vessel Viking Energy, shown to the right here, will be testing ammonia fuel cells from 2024. In parallel with the introduction of alternative fuels, Norway has made investments in infrastructure for LNG bunkering, charging of batteries, and will now need to take action on hydrogen. In DNV Maritime forecast to 2050, we have mapped the key barriers for selected alternative fuels. There is no time to go into the details now, but the report is available online. One key barrier is safety and development of safety regulations. For shipping to succeed in using new fuels, it's a prerequisite that we know how to handle the safety. So, what are the safety challenges? Most non-conventional fuels are gases or low flash point liquids. They have properties posing different safety challenges from those of conventional fuel oils. The main challenges are fire and explosion. Some are toxic, some are stored at cryogenic temperatures, and there is a high energy content in gas tanks. This requires additional safety barriers to maintain the safety level when compared with conventional fuels. And since the properties are specific for each fuel, there is a need for development of requirements for each fuel type. It has been a strong focus in Norway to establish requirements for the safe use of alternative fuels, and by that, removing barriers to the uptake of alternative fuels, starting with national regulations and class rules for LNG 20 years ago, followed by class rules for fuel cells, batteries, methanol, and LPG. On behalf of the Green Shipping Programme, which is a public-private partnership in Norway, DNV has recently completed the development of an ammonia safety handbook with input from the Norwegian Maritime authorities and other partners in an ammonia pilot project. The intention is to provide practical guidance on safety aspects in the development of ammonia fuel ships. The first class rules on ammonia as fuel are planned to be published later this year. There is also ongoing development work for hydrogen, and DNV is working with industry partners on removing barriers. We have initiated the MariSafe joint development project designed to advance maritime hydrogen-specific competence. And this JDP aims to provide preliminary recommendations for safe and effective introduction of hydrogen as a marine fuel in a safety handbook later this year. However, the development of international regulations in IMO is extremely important. When the IGF code entered into force with detailed requirements for LNG in 2017, we saw that it resulted in an increase in the uptake of LNG as fuel in global deep sea shipping. The continued development of IMO regulations for new fuels is key to enable uptake of alternative fuels in the global deep sea shipping. Looking at the current world fleet, a known order book showed that the uptake of alternative fuels in the world fleet is limited but increasing. As you can see to the left in this slide, less than 1% of the existing fleet runs on alternative fuels. Much of that fleet is smaller vessels in short sea shipping. The total order book is shown in the middle of this slide. 10% of new buildings are ordered with alternative fuels, mostly LNG, and some of these are larger vessels for deep sea shipping. What is very interesting is that we currently see a big change happening. For the new buildings ordered in 2020 isolated, actually 22% are with alternative fuels, mostly LNG, but also some LPG and methanol. To the right, we have shown a 2030 IMO compliance scenario from the pathway modeling we have made in the 2020 edition of the Maritime forecast, indicating a need for more than 30% alternative fuels in the world fleet in 2030. This is one of 12 IMO compliance scenarios we have modeled, and the uptake and fuel mix depends on the scenario. And it should be noted that the picture may be different depending on how the IMO framework develops in the coming years. All alternative fuels have barriers and challenges, and waiting for the perfect solution to emerge can take too long to make the necessary shift quickly. Instead, we propose to focus on fuel flexibility and alternative fuel-ready solutions to make the change easier and minimize the risk of stranded assets. The example shown is a ship with dual fuel engines that can run on LNG and MGO. This could lead to an approximately 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions today, depending on the engine technology. It also has various options for changing fuel without making changes on board. If we follow the green line at the top, we see that one can gradually replace fossil LNG with carbon-neutral LNG by switching to bio-based and electro-based LNG when this becomes available. The same flexibility is also possible for MGO as shown with the green line below. For switching to other fuel types, compatibility is more limited and conversion will be necessary for the engine, systems and tanks. By planning a fuel change that requires conversion already at the new building stage, it may ease the conversion at a later stage. This is what we call alternative fuel-ready solutions. In the development of zero-emission solutions for deep-sea shipping, we need pilots. There are, of course, different opportunities in short-sea shipping and deep-sea shipping, and not all technologies are yet applicable in deep-sea shipping. The experience in Norway is that the introduction of alternative fuels and new technologies in short-sea shipping is a good way of maturing technology for the use in regional short sea shipping and later global deep sea shipping. The continued development of IMO regulations for new fuels is key to enable uptake of alternative fuels in global deep sea shipping. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hammer, for your presentation. I see now that there are questions coming in the Q&A function, so please continue to do that when you listen to the presenters. We will now move on to the next presentation by Dr. Sotiris Mamalis of the ABS to present infrastructure and fuel supply challenges associated to the use of hydrogen as marine fuel. Dr. Mamalis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's happy to be here. Hi, everyone. I'm Sotirios Mamalis from the American Bureau of Shipping. I'm the manager of the Houston Sustainability Team. And my presentation today will focus on hydrogen. And in order to put this into the right context, I'm starting here with a rendering of a tanker vessel that has hydrogen tanks stored on board that we decided to call it zero impact and working for zero carbon lines. So with that spin, I'd like to start my presentation and start by saying really what was discussed in the previous presentation by Linda a little bit, that hydrogen will play an important role in the future. The graphic that you see here on the right has been taken from the ABS 2020 Low Carbon Shipping Outlook, which shows that about 35% of the fuels used in the marine sector by 2050 will be ammonia and hydrogen, so zero carbon fuels. And as you know very well, these two fuels have been gaining a lot of attention recently. But today I'd like to draw your attention specifically to hydrogen, because this is the most challenging of the alternative fuels that we have, but at the same time, it has the ability to provide the most benefits. So with that, let's look at the three fuel pathways that ABS has developed. This is a graphic that has been published in multiple documents, but by ABS. And really, the key here of our discussion is in the first line, the light gas pathway. So LNG, as has been mentioned before, and as everybody knows, is the first widely adopted low carbon fuel or alternative fuel. And we understand that the know-how and the experience that we've gained from developing LNG fueled vessels will pave the way to developing hydrogen fueled vessels in the future. That has to do with the fuel containment systems, the fuel gas supply systems, and of course, the operational methods, the operational techniques that you can apply in order to maximize the benefit of using a zero carbon fuel such as hydrogen. So really, the hydrogen is at the end of our light gas pathway, and by the end we mean longer term, so 2035, 2040, and on all the way to 2050. Now, few important, like some basic things about hydrogen. Based on the International Energy Agency numbers from 2019 global production, we know that about 70% of the hydrogen is produced from natural gas, and about 23% is produced from coal. That immediately leads us to believe that the production itself is a carbon intensive process. That does not make hydrogen very, very green. So immediately know that in order to promote the green credentials of hydrogen as a fuel, we need to find other ways to produce it using, for example, renewable energy, and of course, using water as the source. Hydrogen and ammonia are directly linked in the production pathways, because once we have hydrogen formed from whatever the source is, then we can combine it with nitrogen in order to produce ammonia. So really, the production pathways being linked mean that they can be produced in the same facilities or in sister facilities, that can be either centrally located or distributed. The challenge, as you may have heard, with hydrogen, it comes from its storage and transportation. So it's kind of challenging to store it as a gas or a liquid, and I'll tell you about it in the next slide. But recently, we've seen the advent of solid or liquid storage techniques, such as using the liquid organic hydrogen carriers, for example. And again, I'll tell you more in the following slide about it. Of course, once we have hydrogen, we can combine it with other green technologies such as carbon capture and sequestration to produce hydrocarbon fuels. And we do that by combining the hydrogen that we produced with carbon that has been captured, from the atmosphere or from exhaust stacks. And with that, we can form hydrocarbon fuels. And starting from the basic chain, such as methane, we can then upgrade these hydrocarbon fuels to really anything that we like, either smaller chain or higher chain hydrocarbons, all the way to diesel fuels, for example. Now, aside from the importance of hydrogen as a marine fuel, we expect that it will be a significant fuel as cargo. It will be a significant cargo for the future fleet. And I've taken here a number from the Hydrogen Council, and I'm guessing the following presentation can give us a little bit more information about those. But this states that about 18% of the worldwide energy demand will be hydrogen in the future. That would correspond to about 6 gigatons of CO2 reductions annually, and $2.5 trillion of annual sales, resulting in about 30 million jobs created by that time. And the global hydrogen industry is estimated at $7.5 billion by 2050. So it's these are pretty significant numbers, and they point to the fact that we can have a significant hydrogen economy on a global scale by 2050. Now, let's talk specific about hydrogen storage, which will give you a better understanding of the challenges associated with this zero carbon fuel. So as we previously mentioned, hydrogen can be stored as a gas or a liquid. And of course, there are benefits and challenges to either option. It can be stored as a gaseous at 350 to 700 bar compressed, or as a liquid, of course, cryogenically stored at minus 253 degrees C at atmospheric pressure. Or the other option would be to store it on or within solids. And here, the graphic that you see on the right has been taken by the United States Department of Energy that really shows, these two different storage methods, either being physical-based as a gas or a liquid, or being material-based, combined with other materials that can be used to store hydrogen stably, and then have easy extraction after that when these are decomposed. And the importance of this really comes from the fact that there are applications that really pose stringent requirements in terms of space. An example is automotive. The marine applications, not so much, but still we care about space and the tank volumes on board, for example. But a lot of these solutions are currently in the research and development phase. And recently, for example, in the last couple of weeks, I saw an article about a method of storing hydrogen in a gel type of structure that can be easily decomposed and extract the hydrogen on board, whether we're talking about a marine vessel or an automotive application or a car, for example. Now, with that, I'd like to focus your attention on some of the supply chain framework solutions and challenges that we have seen so far. Obviously, due to the very, very limited number of applications of hydrogen to the marine sector, we don't have a lot of examples, but we have one that was recently published by Kawasaki Heavy Industries, and I'd like to show here a graphic that I sourced from that publication. So here we're looking at a chain that has built between Australia and Japan. So we're talking about production of hydrogen from brown coal in Australia, and then transportation of liquefied hydrogen to Japan for local use in many different applications. So starting from the left of this schematic, you can see that Australia obviously wants to take advantage of their large reserves of coal and natural gas to produce hydrogen. But as we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, this is a pretty carbon intensive production process. So there is one thing over there that we need to really take care of, make sure that we reduce the carbon intensity from the production as much as possible. With that said, in terms of IMO actions, there is a lot of discussion about accounting of life cycle emissions when we're talking about alternative fuels. And this is a discussion this is a question, I would say, we get very often from customers. I would say they would ask, if I use a biofuel or something else that has been produced renewably, can we get some benefit from that? And if so, how these benefits quantified? What's the credit for us? So that's really something that we can point back to the IMO, to discuss about. So life cycle emissions accounting. Moving on with the schematic. Once we have the brown coal, then we can go through a gasification and gas refining process to produce the actual hydrogen. And just to give you an idea, Australia has 23 published hydrogen production demonstration projects currently, and we expect to see a lot more obviously in multiple areas around the world. So once we have the hydrogen produced from that central site, there is land transportation using trucks and liquefaction at the port side facility, and of course loading to the vessel as cargo. And of course this could be transported to Japan, where it would be unloaded as a liquid and then stored in specifically designed tanks. The chain that I just described, of course, entails that we have hydrogen liquefaction systems installed at ports, and of course at bunkering facilities if this is to be used as a fuel. And of course, for the liquefied hydrogen carriers, we need to develop the standards and the rules for designing and operating these vessels safely. And also this points back to a point that Linda made with the examples from Norway. The electrification of the marine fleet is closely related to hydrogen, because hydrogen can be used as fuels to power fuel cells, whether we're talking about proton exchange membrane fuel cell, which makes more sense, or other types of fuel cells. So again, electrification, the hydrogen are closely related. We don't have to use hydrogen for internal combustion engines. And finally, if we look at the far right of the schematic, the local and the distributed storage of hydrogen will require the development of standards for safety of all these pressure vessels for storing hydrogen. So really there is a chain of I would say of different items that need to be developed, and of course the rules, the standards, and the accounting of this of any benefits of this in terms of life cycle needs to be developed and put in a rigorous framework by IMO and other agencies. And with that, I'd like to close my presentation by just highlighting some of the challenges and opportunities that hydrogen creates. So starting from the production, I have a list here of all the different production methods that we currently have. And of course, the fossil fuel conversion is really the first one that we mentioned, right? Using coal or natural gas. But it's really the rest that are very, very interesting for us as we're trying to make the hydrogen production greener. Biomass and waste conversion, electrolysis of water, or even thermal splitting of water, and of course other more advanced processes that include biological organisms and photochemical processes, or direct hydrogen carrier production. Of course, the distribution is still an issue. We've seen examples of trucks, carrying the hydrogen, because the properties of the fuel make it very challenging to build a pipeline infrastructure, and that points to more distributed or localized, I would say, hydrogen production stations rather than central production stations and then pipeline delivery to multiple sites. And of course, finally, to the right, you see bunkering. Of course, as was mentioned in the first presentation today, there are a number of port initiatives taken that are requiring to understand what would be needed, what is of critical importance, for bunkering these alternative fuels. But as we said at the beginning, the experience gained from LNG, and it will be critical in our effort to promote hydrogen as a zero carbon fuel. And I think that we eventually see that happening, and of course enjoying the benefits of its zero carbon content. So with that, I'd like to close. Thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to discuss later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mamalis, and indeed you can post your questions in the Q&A function, and thank you for giving us insight in the whole chain, in the production and distribution supply chain on some of the alternative fuels, especially going into hydrogen. Very interesting. We move on to the next presentation, which will be undertaken by Mr. Daryl Wilson, which is the Executive Director of the Hydrogen Council, 2% a state of play, prospects and barriers for hydrogen as marine fuel. Mr. Wilson, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good day. I'm just confirming that you can see the presentation on the screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. My name is Daryl Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of the Hydrogen Council, and I'm speaking to you today from Canada. I'm going to give you an overview of the progress in hydrogen globally, which has accelerated a great deal, especially in 2020. The Hydrogen Council was formed in 2017 at the Davos World Economic Forum, and at that time, just 13 members joined the council. At a recent meeting of CEOs in January, that number is now 109, representing 6.9 million jobs around the world and almost 20 trillion in revenues. So I think very significant that so many companies and so many industries are now sharing a vision around hydrogen for decarbonization. This is a spectrum of our members. What's notable is they come from a wide cross-section of industrial activity around the world.
Mr. Wilson, sorry to interrupt. However, it turns out that we no longer can see your presentation. Perhaps the Secretariat can update us on the situation. Now we can see a slide, yes.
Okay,
we can
fine.
see the slide with a strong and diverse group.
Good. Okay. Sorry, I went
you.
to the full screen mode and apparently it didn't work so well. So hydrogen is a key part of the energy transition for decarbonization. And in our reports from the Hydrogen Council, we have shown that there will be a significant scale up in hydrogen use through 2030. And there are 22 applications representing 15% of global energy demand where hydrogen will serve on a competitive basis, and indeed a very large market by 2050. Here we summarize some of the applications that are already under development around the various regions in the world. You can see that already we have 680 hydrogen fueling stations globally, more than 20,000 passenger car vehicles, more than 6,000 trucks. So perhaps more activity than you were aware already. Early next week, we will release a report which shows a profile of projects that have been announced. You can see there is a lot of activity in Europe, Asia, and Australia, and we're tracking more than 200 projects ongoing for the production of large-scale industrial use of hydrogen in transport and many other infrastructure projects. The total value of this investment is substantial. It now amounts to more than 350 billion in announcements. And out of that very large number, 38 billion have already passed investment decisions. So a lot of progress of late in hydrogen. One of the compelling aspects about hydrogen is it's able to serve as an energy vector across multiple sectors in society. In fact, we sometimes use the word sector coupling. And so you can see on this slide that hydrogen is involved in shipping. We'll come to that in a moment. In the migration of renewable energy as an energy carrier and a means of storage, integration into industry, in aviation, in transport. So many, many functions can be carried out with hydrogen as an energy vector. To understand these diverse applications, the Hydrogen Council prepared a report, and this again will be updated very shortly coming next week with a spectrum of the applications, considering which ones are most competitive against incumbent solutions, conventional energy pathways, and then which ones where hydrogen is the most competitive green energy pathway. And so the attractive location on this matrix is in the top right-hand side. And you can see that listed in the top right-hand side is in the orange there, fertilizer and ammonia fertilizer in particular. So when we discuss ammonia as a fuel for marine shipping, it is actually on the radar for one of the most competitive decarbonization pathways for hydrogen. You'll also see in the middle of the screen the RoPax marine application and small regional ferry applications, also showing strong competitiveness in terms of hydrogen applications. There have been many announcements in the last year from various regional and national governments around hydrogen. And on this slide, we show those areas which are most progressed. You'll see the European Union, Germany, France, China, Korea, and Japan, where we have a strategy, targets, and a legislative plan with substantial funding allocations. And there are another 31 countries that have also shown strong progress on the road to the hydrogen economy. On this slide, we share some of the total investment support. Again, you can see very large announcements in the European Union, Japan, Germany, Spain, and France, and a lot of progress in many other countries as well, but very large commitments of funding from these countries that I have profiled. So when it comes to considering hydrogen as a marine fuel, in many ways, the hydrogen solution is similar to what you would be familiar with batteries. Typically, the hydrogen fuel cell solution is delivered in a rack-mounted system similar to batteries, and then integrated into the vessel as an electrochemical engine producing electrical energy, but the main drive system of the marine application then is an electric motor. Here you see the 240 kilowatt rack-mounted system from Cummins and a spectrum of projects where Cummins has been deploying hydrogen fuel cells shipboard and portside in the initial demonstration projects. Ballard is another provider of marine solutions using fuel cells, and you can see a spectrum of some of their projects. And as shown in an earlier presentation, there is quite some history now in shipboard applications and fuel cells dating back to the 2005-2008 timeframe. In fact, Ballard has a Marine Center of Excellence for the deployment of fuel cells. And here again, you see a rack-mounted 200 kilowatt system from Ballard. The attractiveness here is that the hydrogen system can be fueled more or less on the same time frame as a diesel system. So you're putting a liquid or gaseous fuel on board, and that rapid refueling, yet being an electrified system, is one of the attractive points of hydrogen as a fuel. In Japan, another example with the NYK line working together with Kawasaki Heavy Industries and Ineos Corporation. This ship actually will be in service in the not too distant future. And there are very strong aspirations for Japan to look to hydrogen as a means of bringing decarbonized energy into their economy from the Middle East or from Australia. Here, one of the key activities of the Hydrogen Council is to make clear the competitive and cost profile for hydrogen. Cost has been one of the impediments over time, and we have taken the role to start to show the roadmap for cost reduction to realize some of these applications. So here you see on the left-hand side the base case for a heavy oil 67 megawatt vessel operating out of the Middle East. And the main bar chart there shows the cost in millions of dollars, US dollars per year for a container ship bunkering out of the Middle East with a prime motive power at 67 megawatts and an annual distance of more than 8,000 nautical miles per year. So it is the case that the lowest cost profile is with heavy fuel oil. You can see a dual fuel ammonia ship in the first block here, biodiesel, ammonia, methanol, liquid hydrogen, and ammonia. We also show on this chart the break-even cost of a carbon price that would cause some of these applications to move to break even. And on the bar chart is showing the cost for the CapEx, the fuel, and the operating and maintenance costs. So this is the kind of activity that the Hydrogen Council has been facilitating to help show the roadmap for decarbonization pathways using hydrogen. So wrapping up, There have been many of these points made in earlier presentations, so I won't dwell extensively here, but obviously hydrogen and ammonia, which is related to hydrogen, are key methodologies for decarbonizing marine transport. They are a connection between marine transport and renewable energy, as has been illustrated using hydrogen from electrolysis or green hydrogen, so we can get that connection with renewable energy. The processes around fuel cells and electrolysis now are mature, scaling up, and costs are coming down rapidly. So those are some of the key points. And in earlier presentations, we've heard about the work that's required around the safe deployment of these items. They are new to the marine environment and to fuel systems. I've profiled some of the cost trajectories where we're showing that these pathways will become more competitive over time. And we are working along with global agencies on regulations, codes, and standards to make sure that as these new applications scale up, they will be deployed safely. There is an extensive network of international safety codes and standards because hydrogen is today a $200 billion industry globally. It's used extensively in the production of fertilizer and in the refining of liquid fuels. So there's plenty of experience, but as hydrogen moves into these new applications in the marine environment, there's absolutely work to do. And I think some of that was well profiled in some of the earlier presentations. With that, we'll turn it back to our chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson, for sharing the global overview of, let's say, the hydrogen economy and also how we may apply that in shipping. And I do understand that it's very early morning for you in Canada. But I think you will be with us also to take questions and go into the Q&A session to provide your questions to Mr. Wilson. And we now will continue with the last presentation on this block. And I'm happy to invite Dr. Brian Comer of the International Council of Clean Transportation to present his views on providing alternative marine fuels, supply chain, sustainability considerations, required infrastructure, and how IMO can help. Dr. Comer, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Optedal, and just confirming you can see the slides.
Yes, we can see your slides.
Thank you. The ICCT is an independent nonprofit research organization with offices in Beijing, Berlin, Sao Paulo, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. I lead the ICCT's marine program, and I'm also a co-author of the 4th IMO greenhouse gas study. The ICCT's marine program is dedicated to providing policymakers with the data and analysis that they need to avoid, reduce, and eliminate pollution from the global shipping sector. And today I'm pleased to present on alternative marine fuels, including supply chain sustainability considerations, required infrastructure, and importantly for today, how IMO can help. I'll first explain the basics of life cycle analysis for marine fuels. Then I'll outline 3 principles for evaluating the sustainability of alternative marine fuels. And I'll explain why each principle is important for IMO policymaking. These 3 principles are what the audience should focus most of its attention on today. I'll then shift gears and give an example of where investments in green hydrogen infrastructure could support a zero life cycle emission container shipping corridor. And I'll conclude with a summary of what IMO can do to ensure that policies promote only sustainable marine fuels. Let's begin with the basics of life cycle analysis. As you might imagine, the production and consumption of marine fuels generates climate pollution at multiple points, beginning with the emissions associated with extraction at the well and ending with emissions from combusting the fuel on the ship. Emissions generated from extracting, distributing, and processing the fuel are referred to as well to tank, also known as upstream emissions. Emissions generated during combustion are called tank to wake, also known as downstream emissions. And together, these upstream and downstream emissions comprise a fuel's well to tank or life cycle emissions. Well to wake or life cycle emissions. Life cycle emissions from fossil fuels, like the example heavy fuel oil on the right, are generally dominated by combustion emissions, which you see in gray. However, upstream emissions, especially those from extraction and processing, can vary considerably. Now let's consider a biofuel made from a food crop, in this case, soybeans. Instead of extracting crude oil from the ground, soybeans are grown and then converted into what's known as renewable diesel in this case. It's called renewable diesel because the feedstock, the soybeans, are a renewable resource. But just because it's called renewable does not necessarily mean that it's sustainable. If you look at the graph on the right, you'll notice that the combustion emissions in gray are offset by the carbon the soybeans sequestered while they were growing, shown as negative emissions in green. But there are emissions associated with cultivating, distributing, and processing the soybeans, shown in black, yellow, and red. And you'll also notice the brown block at the top, labeled indirect land use change. Because soybeans are a food crop, the soybeans that are grown to make biodiesel displace those that are used for food. And to continue to meet the demand for soybeans, new land will be cultivated to grow soybeans for food. And the emissions associated with indirect land use change can vary significantly depending on the crop and also what the newly cultivated land was previously used for. So as you can see, one must carefully consider the climate credentials of fuels to determine whether or not they are truly sustainable. To help, the ICCT has developed 3 principles for evaluating the sustainability of alternative marine fuels, and allow me to go over each one in a little more detail. The first principle is to consider carbon dioxide equivalents, not just carbon dioxide. Why? Because some fuels are zero carbon, but not zero greenhouse gas. This is important to IMO because IMO's initial greenhouse gas strategy aims to reduce greenhouse gases by at least 50% from 2008 levels by 2050, and to phase them out completely as soon as possible this century. The pitfall IMO must avoid relates to zero carbon marine fuels that nevertheless emit greenhouse gases. For example, burning ammonia emits no carbon dioxide, but it does emit nitrous oxide, N2O, a potent and long-lived greenhouse gas. For now, IMO regulations like the EEDI only regulate carbon dioxide. Given that IMO's stated goal is to reduce and eliminate greenhouse gases, which are reported as carbon dioxide equivalents and not merely carbon dioxide, the IMO could regulate carbon dioxide equivalents in existing and future regulations, including the EEDI, which regulates the carbon intensity of new ships, and in regulations that are under development to regulate the carbon intensity of existing ships, including the EEXI and the carbon intensity indicator. Principle 2 is to consider the 20-year global warming potential of climate pollutants, not solely their 100-year global warming potential. GWP20, as we call it, reflects the global warming potential of climate pollutants over the next 20 years rather than the next 100 years. This is important to IMO because in the IMO's initial greenhouse gas strategy, it aims to be consistent with the Paris Agreement temperature goals, which include pursuing efforts to limit warming to no more than 1.5 degrees. The world is in danger of overshooting 1.5, as 2020 was 1.3 degrees warmer than pre-industrial levels, according to Columbia University. Reducing pollutants with high 20-year global warming potential, such as black carbon and methane, helps avoid additional near-term warming. The warming effects of black carbon are important for oil-based fuels like heavy fuel oil and very low sulfur fuel oil. And the warming effects of methane are important to consider when evaluating the climate credentials of using LNG, where the amount of unburned methane emitted directly from the ship in the form of methane slip depends heavily on the engine technology. Principle 3 is to consider a fuel's well-to-wake rather than tank-to-wake emissions. As I showed, the climate impacts of marine fuels go beyond the downstream emissions emitted during combustion. Considering the full life cycle emissions of marine fuels is important to IMO because IMO regulations currently focus on tank-to-wake emissions, as in the EEDI, for example. Focusing solely on tank-to-wake emissions risks rewarding fuels that have high life cycle emissions. For example, if a ship uses hydrogen, it will have zero tank-to-wake emissions, But if that hydrogen is made from fossil fuels, it will have considerable well-to-wake emissions. A fuel's climate credentials therefore depend on its full life cycle emissions. Shifting gears, allow me to give you a quick example of where green hydrogen infrastructure could support zero life cycle emission container shipping. In this example, green hydrogen means hydrogen with zero well-to-wake emissions, such as hydrogen made with renewable electricity from wind, solar waves, or geothermal. You're looking at the main container ship traffic patterns along the Trans-Pacific corridor between Asia and North America. The ICCT found that if you replace fossil-fueled internal combustion engines with liquid hydrogen fuel cells, about half of the voyages could be completed without any changes to ship operations, and the other half, ships would need to either replace a portion of their cargo space with fuel, or instead they could refuel once along the route. The circular fuel icons are places where green hydrogen refueling stations could be placed. To replace all fossil-fueled ships with hydrogen on the Trans-Pacific corridor, ports would need to supply about 750,000 tons of hydrogen each year, especially in Northeast Asia and in California's San Pedro Bay region. This is equivalent to about 1% of the hydrogen used in the industrial sector each year, but the difference is that this hydrogen would need to be made from renewable electricity to be sustainable, whereas as we heard earlier, nearly all hydrogen used today is made from fossil fuels. Liquid hydrogen needs to be stored in highly insulated tanks like the one on the left, and we calculated the amount of land area needed at each port to provide enough liquid hydrogen to fuel the Trans-Pacific fleet. And we found that the tanks would take up less than 1% of the land area in major refueling ports, but space is tight at ports and refueling barges could also be used. Now that you've seen an example of how sustainable alternative fuels could be used, let's conclude with some ways that IMO could help ensure that policies promote sustainable alternative marine fuels that have bona fide climate credentials based on the 3 principles we outlined earlier. First is replacing carbon dioxide with carbon dioxide equivalents and proposed in existing regulations. Second is calculating carbon dioxide equivalents based on the 20-year global warming potential of climate pollutants like black carbon and methane for regulations that are meant to align with the Paris Agreement temperature goals. And the third is regulating well-to-wake carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, not tank-to-wake, in policies that are designed to promote the uptake of sustainable alternative fuels. Thanks to my ICT colleagues, to Pacific Environment for arranging for me to present to the IMO, and to all of you for your attention. And I look forward to your questions today or by email. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Comer, for your presentations. And now we have had the presentations on block 3, and we are ready to embark on the questions and answers to those presentations. We will do it like we did it yesterday. We start with looking into what is already submitted in the Q&A function. And also afterwards, if anybody wants to take the floor orally to pose questions to the presenter, that will also be possible. And now I will turn to the Secretariat, Mr. Hondas, to provide some questions which you have observed in the Q&A function. Mr. Hondas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. And a big thanks on behalf of the IMO Secretariat to all the panelists and for providing such a clear and informative presentation, particularly focusing on hydrogen. You probably have seen that the chat and the Q&A, both in the Zoom meeting as well as on the YouTube channel, is quite active. We've seen that some of the questions have already been answered, but there are still quite a number of questions that have been posed to the panelists. So, Mr. Moderator, I give you a couple of initial questions to start with, and then I can come in at a later stage with some additional questions. So, to start with, Mr. Alkema, in relation to ports. Sunil Krishna Kumar from ICS asked something specifically about the details of bunker facility operator licensing. And this is something that has been discussed in MEPC. So would these schemes be extended beyond the bunkering of LNG considering the objective of safe and efficient supply to all future fuels. And particularly the Port of Amsterdam, would the port consider implementing a mandatory licensing scheme for bunker suppliers operating in that port? Bopana Palekanda also had a question for Peter Alkema concerning shore power supply, so cold ironing, and how IEPH is actually promoting cold ironing in ports across the world, and particularly, of course, to reduce emissions during loading and discharging operations. For Ms. Hammer from DNV, we have a question from Fernando Costa from Brazil, speaking about the high explosive potential of hydrogen and whether this is the regulations to of course, reduce the explosive character or to manage the explosiveness of hydrogen in Norway. Is that something that's being developed mostly by business themselves, or is the government, let's say the administration, actively involved in that? Another question from the YouTube chat is about retrofitting costs and whether there are any studies done about the retrofitting cost of switching to hydrogen for existing ships. So if Ms. Hammer could give some indication on that, that would be helpful. For Dr. Marmalis, a question also from ICS. For ship owners who are thinking about investing in light and heavy gas fueled ships, what are the options and what would you envisage in terms of the possible future alteration of these ships to store and burn zero and low carbon sustainable fuels? Any advice to ship owners on proving their investments? Another question from Peter Hinchcliffe on the YouTube channel. To Dr. Marmalis, he mentioned in his presentation the importance of life cycle analysis and that this needs to be taken up in IMO regulation. How is ABS working on promoting these life cycle analysis? Mr. Wilson, a couple of questions for you, particularly related to the economics. So how economic is the transport of liquid hydrogen by ship versus LNG or ammonia? Another question as well, also related to kind of the future forecast of using hydrogen. Hydrogen or ammonia can be produced in the same line with pure hydrogen. And what do you think actually, when you compare hydrogen to ammonia, what could tip the forecast for in using hydrogen as above or over ammonia? For Dr. Comer, thanks for his presentation. A question about the global warming potential. He mentioned in his presentation to use the 20 years global warming potential instead of 100. Whether he can clarify it a little bit more on that, because it seems that IPCC refers in their own work to the GWP-100 rather than 20. And lastly, also a question for Dr. Comer from Brazil, related to the ongoing work on the development of carbon intensity rating for ships. How do you see the results and assessments of energy efficiency ranging from A to E? And how is that linked to the fuel being used and the life cycles, and how can that be accounted for? So how can the rating system be linked to the fuel assessment and the life cycle assessment guidelines? So back to you, Mr. Moderator. As you can see, very active questions and a very active audience, both in YouTube and in Zoom. So I hope I haven't exhausted the speakers yet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hornes, and indeed very good questions and a lot of questions clearly presented. And then I need to queue up with my own questions, but let's take it in the order of the presentations and start with Mr. Alkema on the two questions you received. Mr. Alkema, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Yeah, first of all, on the details of the licensing of bunker facility operators. Thanks for the question. I can tell a little bit more about this. As CMF, we provide the audit tool that may be used by a port authority to issue a bunker license to a bunker facility operator. So this tool will indeed be extended beyond LNG. CMF will do so that port authorities may check safety management systems of bunker facility operators for any fuel. It is, however, up to the authority how to use the tool. Authorities around the world will have different policies, different bylaws, and ways to issue bunker licenses. I can, however, give an example for the ports in Northwest Europe. In Amsterdam, a bunker facility operator of any new low flash point fuel can apply for a license. We will audit the bunker facility operator's safety management system, and based on the result, we will be able to issue a license. So the audit provides in testing the safety management system of the bunker facility operator and the way it cooperates with the vessels that are being bunkered. It is a test on both on management level of the bunker company and on the vessel level. And after the bunker license is issued, it also provides in reality checks in which we test whether the safety management system is also working in practice. A good thing about the IPH audit system is I think that once a bunker facility operator has been audited in one IPH member port, the results of that audit may be presented to another IPH member port when the bunker facility operator is applying for a license in that port. That port then may or may not decide not to audit again and issue a license based on the results of the other port, or maybe even go for a smaller audit only based on the local circumstances. So I saw there was also a question regarding a mandatory licensing system in Port of Amsterdam. So basically for low flash point fuels, we have this mandatory licensing system. Each BFO is required to apply for a license when it comes to operations in the port. But for conventional fuels, this is not the case yet. We are, however, working together with Port of Rotterdam, working on a mandatory license also for conventional fuels, but the focus there is much more on quality perspective. So I hope that answers the question. There was also a question on shore power in ports and what IPH is doing in order to make sure that OPS is implemented. Well, IPH is an association for ports worldwide, and IPH can, however, not decide on policies and developments in its member ports. IPH can, however, provide guidance, and it has done so already for over 10 years. 10 years ago, there was a working group on OPS, and the results of the working group can be found actually on the website of the World Port Sustainability Program. IPH has also teamed up with World Port Climate Action Program of ports internationally to work further on OPS. And also this information can be found on the same website. With respect to Amsterdam, we have already OPS for our inland vessels, for our river cruise vessels, and we are now at the point of creating a vision with respect to OPS for seagoing vessels. There is, however, still also discussion on the benefits of OPS when compared to cleaner fuels, so we have to go through that as well. I hope that answers the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alkema, and I think we just move straight to the next one. Ms. Hammer, to respond to your two questions, and I think we have altogether 9 minutes left before we need to go into the other block. Ms. Hammer, please.
Yes, I'll try to keep it short. First, a question related to hydrogen safety regulations. As pointed out several times today, hydrogen is challenging due to their explosiveness. And there are knowledge gaps related to how to handle hydrogen safely on board ships. And we want to contribute to remove barriers and have therefore initiated this a joint development project, Maritime, as I mentioned. And this consists actually of 25 international partners, including the Norwegian maritime authorities. There are a lot of partners involved in that work, but the aim is not to develop regulations now. We first need to build competence in this area for maritime specific hydrogen competence. And the aim for the joint development project is to make preliminary recommendations. And then there was a question related to space is required to store hydrogen compared to conventional fuels, and that's 4 times more space is needed. So that makes it challenging for deep sea shipping to go over to liquefied hydrogen as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sommer. And then we turn to Dr. Mamalis of the ABS to respond to the 2 questions. Dr. Mamalis, please.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. So in the interest of time, I prefer to just summarize some of the points that will probably cover all the questions correctly rather than going into each one of them. So first things first, hydrogen can be used in internal combustion engines. That's the case. But we envision that in the future we will see it in the use with fuel cells, so in different applications. And currently there are a number of OEMs that have launched hydrogen-capable engines, such as ABC, for example. But these are mostly smaller 4-stroke single-fuel engines with pre-chamber ignition technologies rather than larger 2-stroke slow-speed with dual fuel capability. But this can also happen in the future, just that I haven't seen much yet. So that's one thing. The second item that I'd like to address has to do with the flexibility of the vessels to use ammonia versus hydrogen versus other fuels, and how we can easily, I would say, how we can easily move from one fuel to the other. That's a question that we frequently get from ship owners, asking how can I build my future vessel to have the maximum flexibility possible. So there are 2 levels of answers over here. So the first level is that there are certain fuels that are related in terms of properties. For example, the heavy gases, LPG, methanol, and ammonia. So currently there are engine platforms and storage solutions that can be used, for these different fuels, and these can be used interchangeably on the vessel without too much hassle. However, I would say, moving from LNG to hydrogen is a requires much more extensive redesign of the vessel and a retrofit of different systems. So that would be expensive, and we're practically talking about a redesigned vessel. However, we've seen from other applications like stationary power generation applications that there is hydrogen blending into the LNG or the CNG, and that can be something that could start to happen in the marine sector, and that would give us actual real tank to wake emissions benefits from using hydrogen, even at smaller quantities at first. Now, with that said, we've seen that a number of tank manufacturers and a number of engine manufacturers are trying to make their tanks and their engines as flexible as possible. For example, we've seen cases that tanks to be designed to accommodate both LNG and ammonia, for example, and engines being designed to accommodate LPG, methanol, and ammonia. So the flexibility is important, because based on the differences of these of the different alternative fuels that we saw, so LNG, LPG, ammonia, hydrogen, the differences in properties currently require different tanks, fuel gas supply systems, and of course the power generation systems. So building in this flexibility will be important also from a commercial point of view in terms of route planning and voyage planning and things like that for the vessel. So that's important. Couple of other things that came up regarding the economics. So transitioning from LNG to hydrogen currently is an expensive operation. So but transitioning from LPG to methanol or to ammonia, for example, is not as expensive, simply because of the reasons that we just mentioned. that there's a lot of similarities in the tanks, fuel gas supply systems, and the power generation systems. And
Dr. Mamalis, can we do it as follows? Because in order to also allocate time to the two other presenters, that the questions put forward, there will also be a follow-up with the responses in writing, so the Secretariat will make this available. But in order to give a little bit time also to the remaining presenters to respond to the questions, I'm sorry to do this, but it's just time management. Thank you very much for your. It is really interesting to listen to your insight on this topic. I will now turn to Mr. Wilson on the hydrogen economy to respond briefly to the questions you received.
Sure. I believe the question has to do with the comparison between ammonia, liquid hydrogen, and other liquid organic carriers of hydrogen. Indeed, the field is not yet mature enough, and we have not seen enough scale demonstrations to resolve the cost comparison with clarity. And as a manifestation of that immaturity, we see a broad spectrum of demonstration projects around the world covering all three pathways: ammonia, liquid and gaseous hydrogen, and liquid organic carriers of hydrogen. So as these demonstrations unfold, I think the cost picture will become more plain. Probably the most mature activity in the world is in Japan and Korea, where there's been an interest to move energy in the form of these hydrogen carriers between renewable sources of energy or decarbonized sources of energy, both in the Middle East and Australia, to Korea and Japan. So these are where we're seeing the largest scale projects, and probably we will get the best information. In order of maturity, ammonia would be the most mature with the most experience and most clarity about the cost today. Gaseous hydrogen next, liquid hydrogen following that, and then liquid organic carriers are the least mature and the least is known about the cost at this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. And then finally, I turn to Dr. Comer, and can I request you to respond to the GWP 20 or 100 question, and then we take the other questions in writing afterwards. So, Dr. Comer, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, the question is why GWP 20 instead of GWP 100. Actually, I'm suggesting that IMO consider GWP 20 in addition to GWP 100. So both are important, not just focusing on GWP 20. And it's because IMO's greenhouse gas strategy aims to be aligned with the Paris Agreement, and reducing pollutants that have high 20-year global warming potential, like black carbon and methane in the short term, helps avoid additional near-term warming, and that helps prevent or minimize overshooting the Paris Agreement temperature goals, especially when we're already 1.3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels today. It relates to LNG's climate credentials, which depend strongly on the engine technology. And SOx is regulated, carbon dioxide is regulated by the EEDI, NOx is regulated. And so engine technologies designed for low NOx without aftertreatment emit large quantities of methane, which is currently unregulated. And looking at the 20-year global warming potential of pollutants like methane can help send a signal to reduce those emissions in the nearer term to prevent that overshoot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Comer, for a very precise answer. And I will not provide a lengthy summary on this, but other than to say it has been very interesting to have some more insight into all the work which is going on to the exploration and production and supply chain on the alternative fuels to be used by maritime transportation. And indeed, there will be responses also in writing to the questions which the Secretariat will make available to you. Now, we will move into the fourth block, and I have been informed that all the presenters are ready. Which is then the final presentation on prospects for alternative fuels. And this is very, let's say, the grand finale of our symposium. And again, to these presenters, you will then be able to post your questions in the Q&A function. And according to the program, let's see where we are. It is just looking into. Yes, we will, as the first presenter, according to the program, will be Professor Roberto Schaefer from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, which will present a case study, prospects for alternative marine fuel production in Brazil. So without any further delay, Mr. Schaefer, you have now your 10 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my slides.
We can.
Okay, so my name is Roberto Schaefer. I'm going to be presenting here the production of alternative marine fuels in Brazil, a integrated assessment modeling perspective. And basically, just put this presentation in context, let's say this presentation is based on a paper recently published on with the same name. And this paper is part of a broader research project that split the work in 3 different phases. Phase 1 is comparative analysis of alternative marine fuels. Phase 2 is a georeferenced analysis, life cycle assessment. And then phase 3, which is the economic analysis using integrated assessment models. So basically what I'm going to be presenting here is phase number 3. But it's important to point it out that phase 1 will be submitted by Brazil for the discussion in the IMO Intersessional Working Group on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Very briefly, the integrated assessment models we have been developing in Brazil for the past 20 years. We have BLUES, which is a national integrated assessment model. And then we have 2 global models, the coffee model and the tea model. But today I'm going to be focusing on the BLUES model, which is a partial equilibrium energy land use materials model. So basically this is what I'm going to be doing here. So how, let's say, BLUES represent the Brazilian economy and how, let's say, maritime fuels can be represented into that model. So basically we have a very detailed discussion about technology progress, population growth, economic projections as the driving forces behind, let's say, the scenarios I'm going to be presenting here to you. And the structure of the model focus on the energy system, materials, and also on agriculture and the land use, which is critical when you're talking about, for example, biofuels for shipping. This model has roughly some 30,000 technologies represented in it. And basically the output of this model is energy use, greenhouse gas emissions, petrochemicals, agricultural products, and for example, water demand. So what we have done is basically use or adapted this integrated model for Brazil to represent international shipping and to represent maritime fuels into that model to see, let's say, how the model will react to, for example, meet the IMO target by 2050. So how we have represented these fuels into our models. We have split these fuels into fossil fuels, implying indirect fossil greenhouse gas emissions. So we have looked into fossil bunker, fossil LNG, and fossil methanol. But we also have looked into renewable fuels like first generation distilled biofuels, bio-based synthetic liquids, and bio-based alcohols and liquefied gases. And also from the hydrogen side, we have looked into hydrogen-based fuels, and we have looked into green, blue, and gray hydrogen. And this, as I'm going to be showing you, does make all the difference in the results and analysis I'm going to be performing here. So this is very briefly how the production routes of these different fuels are represented in our model. So in the case of the fossil routes, we're talking about crude oil, producing oil, going through a oil refinery, producing fossil bunker, or you can produce ethene and through oligomerization produce fossil bunker, or natural gas through liquefaction producing liquefied natural gas, or through chemical synthesis producing fossil methanol. In the case of hydrogen-based, we have looked into hydrogen that could produce ammonia through Haber-Bosch process, or you can produce hydrogen liquids and then go into hydrogen bunker or electro bunker, depending upon if I use electricity-based hydrogen to do that. And also it's important, I'm going to focus on that later on the byproducts associated with some of these routes. So basically, eventually, you may have a fossil route or a renewable route or a hydrogen route where the fuel for shipping is a byproduct of other products, and this does make all the difference in the results I'm going to be showing you. In the case of bio-based fuels, we have looked into ethanol for bioethene production, and then through oligomerization producing biobunker, or lignocellulose biomass through bioethene or biomass to liquids to produce biobunker, or using biomass residues also through BTL or biodigestion to produce biomethanol or biobunker, and also vegetable oil through hydrogenation to produce hydrotreated vegetable oil or direct use as straight vegetable oil. So these are all, let's say, fuels that we have put into our integrated model to see the responses to that. So we have run two different groups of scenarios. In the case of group 1, we have run 4 different scenarios. The first one is a baseline scenario, basically meaning we're not concerned about IMO targets, but simply look into the future of international shipping in terms of fuel. Then we have interpreted the IMO target as being CO2 only, meaning that we would meet the IMO 2050 target in terms of CO2 only, 50% reduction by 2050 as compared to 2008 in CO2 only. And we're not concerned about any national target, but only the IMO target. Or we have interpreted the IMO target in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So we are talking about CO2 equivalent in 2050, 50% below 2008 numbers. And also we have, let's say, added a new scenario, which is the one that's the most important one, and hopefully the most interesting one, which is a Brazil below 2C scenario. So basically, we run a scenario for Brazil in a below 2C world to see whether or not IMO target would fit well into this strategy for Brazil. And I think this is the most interesting result I'm going to be showing you later on. Also, in the case of group 2, we have run 4 different scenarios. One is what we call a IMO drop-in scenario, which basically we meet the CO2 equivalent target for IMO, but only using IMO or only using drop-in fuels. Or the same way, let's say we meet the IMO target in CO2 equivalent, but only using a hydrogen bunker fuels, or only using methanol, or only using ammonia. And basically, we want to see, let's say, what are the implications in terms of greenhouse gas emissions of these 4 different scenarios or 4 different strategies. So here we begin to see, let's say, the first results. Let's focus on the right-hand side, which is where we have the high demand scenario for shipping, because also we have, let's say, run different demand scenarios. Let's say how shipping will look like in 2050. But I think it's the most interesting scenario is to look into a high demand scenario for international shipping by 2050. So here we see the results for 2050. In the high demand scenario for group 1, as expected, the baseline or doing nothing for the IMO target simply means that by 2050, we're going to be using 100% fossil bunker. If you interpret the IMO target in terms of CO2 only, the least cost solution for 2050 is to use some hydrotreated vegetable oil, some straight vegetable oil, and some LNG. If you interpret the IMO target in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, because of methane emissions, because of N2O emissions, in that case, the solution is different. In that case, we see some fossil bunker, we see some hydrotreated vegetable oil, and then we see some straight vegetable oil. But when we look into a Brazil below 2 degrees scenario for 2050, we see a completely different result. Basically, if Brazil wants to stay below 2C or in a world below 2C, the strategy or the least cost solution is basically to have some fossil bunker and then have, let's say, a lot of synthetic bunker. And I'm going to explain this later. The reason for that is simply because, let's say, synthetic bunker is a byproduct of other things going on in the Brazilian economy to meet the 2-degree target. And then in the group 2 scenarios, basically we see, let's say, similar thing. Let's say what would be a 100% drop-in solution, a 100% H2 bunker solution, or ammonia solution, or methanol solution to meet, let's say, the IMO target in CO2 equivalent, and then have these different fuels as the single fuels to complement the fossil bunker. So basically, I'm almost done here. Basically, we see that, let's say, the different strategies or the different scenarios have some different spillover effects. So basically, we show that to meet, let's say, the IMO target in terms of CO2 or in terms of greenhouse gases or using drop-ins, you may meet the IMO target, but then you have spillovers into the rest of the life cycle chain, showing that in the case of, for example, IMO target with H2 bunker, you have 3 times more emissions outside, let's say, the IMO target as a spillover effect because of the life cycle analysis of that. The same applies to ammonia, the same applies to methanol. And it's interesting to say that basically in the below 2C scenario for Brazil, basically we do not have any significant, let's say, impact on national emissions. On the contrary, let's say the below 2C scenario for Brazil as a side effect also have, let's say, the IMO target embodied into that solution. So thank you very much. So the message here is exactly that. The real interpretation of the IMO target should be in a broader context of an integrated assessment model, so that we see the target is a byproduct of a country result. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Schaefer, for presenting your extensive scenario work in 10 minutes. So impressive. And questions to Professor Schaefer can, of course, be posted in the Q&A function. And we now move to the next presenter, which is Mr. Jesse Farnstock from the Getting to Zero Coalition, to present his work on mapping of zero-emission pilots and demonstration projects. Mr. Farnstock, the floor is yours. You can share your screen if you have your presentation available.
Great, thank you very much. Can you see the presentation now?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me here. My name is Jesse Farnstock. I'm a project director with the Global Maritime Forum. I hope many of you are familiar with us, and hopefully also with the Getting to Zero Coalition, which is the driving force behind this study, this mapping of zero-emission pilot and demonstration project, which I'd like to present today. But maybe for those of you who are less familiar, I can give a quick introduction to the Getting to Zero Coalition anyway. The coalition was launched in 2018 and currently has over 120 member companies. The ambition, as it says in the name, is to have commercially viable zero-emission vessels operating along deep-sea trade routes by 2030. But we're not just focused on the shipping side, although we are primarily a shipping industry initiative. We have many members from the energy sector, from the port side, and we have even some participants from the shipper side and from public sector bodies and other knowledge partners providing expertise. We have a number of work streams within the coalition. One of them is called Motivating First Movers, and the Motivating First Movers group, so people who are very interested in early action on zero-emission shipping, have been the initiative takers for this study that I'm going to present. We also have groups working on fuels, on different opportunities as they appear differently in different global contexts, and also on measures to close the competitiveness gap. The study that I want to produce today is a mapping, and it's the second edition. So there's an update of a study that was first released last year. This is very much an overview of what's happening in this space. So you've actually seen, I've managed to participate in some of the sessions the last couple of days. You've seen a lot of detailed presentation of projects that are included in this mapping. This is really zooming out to see what's happening overall. I should say that we do not believe or claim that this is a comprehensive mapping. Indeed, there's no chance that it's comprehensive. Much of the work being done is confidential for the companies involved. Some of the work has not been made public for other reasons. And there are, of course, other biases and limitations in our scanning of the situation, and that we are biased by languages in material that's been published and other challenges. However, we do think that it's a telling study anyway, even though we don't think it's comprehensive. The projects that we're looking at cover the full value chain, so we're looking both at ship technologies, but also fuel production and bunkering projects. And we've tried to categorize them both on where they are in the world, but also what kind of project they are, what kind of fuel they're focusing on, and whether or not they have public financial support. Just to get the big picture, most of the projects that we've included in the mapping have a connection to Europe. A little, or about 2/3 of the total of 106 projects we've got in the mapping right now have a connection to Europe. There's several reasons for that. We're based in Europe. We have a lot of member companies based in Europe, so that biases the research. But we also think there is a lot of activity going on in Europe. And Norway, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Belgium all have numerous projects in the mapping. Since the first edition, we've managed to expand the geographical spread so that we do include almost twice as many projects in Asia as we had before. For example, we believe and expect there are many more projects we have not yet uncovered, but still we also suspect, based on the timing of the projects we have uncovered, that there is an increase in activity happening in Asia as well. So that we do see a broadening in the geographical spread of activity in this area. Looking at some emerging trends, here we're just sort of comparing between two time periods. So projects that started before 2020 and projects that started in 2020. And if we look specifically at large ship projects, which is of particular interest for our coalition, we see a notable uptake in hydrogen-based ship technology projects, but particularly an uptick in ammonia projects, 4 of which are large demonstration projects. And we've also seen a couple new concept studies launched in 2020. For smaller ships, we see a continuing trend towards hydrogen and battery power, and in fact, a lot of combinations of the two. This is perhaps unsurprising, but what you might see from these two bits of information, and obviously it's still early, but what you might guess from these two bits of information is you're getting increasing specialization in the demonstration project. On the fuel production side, there's been no major shift in trends here over time, but we do see focus on power decks fuel production, so hydrogen based fuels as really the dominant focus for these studies. That's perhaps not so surprising, given that some of the other options are more mature and maybe don't require quite as much demonstration or piloting. In terms of the project type and developments in the projects, if we look back at the first edition of the study, we see about 10% of the projects that were included in that study have since then, in the last 6 months, announced a new phase or expanded the size or scope of their work, which we think is very positive. Of course, we hope that will end up being a much larger number over time. 6 months isn't that long. Many of these projects have 4 or 5 year timelines. Of the 106 projects in this mapping, over half received direct public funding. Now, it's important to clarify here that there are many kinds of public support that do not appear as direct public funding through public funding vehicles that are easily identified. So there is probably other kinds of public support for some of these projects. But the majority of public funding for these projects has been originating from Europe. The largest awards of funding go to large-scale fuel production projects. That's also not surprising, given that these are probably the most capital-intensive items in our overview. It's also important to note that while many projects don't report whether or not there is public funding, so they're indicated as no funding found in the lower graph there, There are some that specifically do identify themselves as not being publicly funded, being fully privately funded. So what next? This edition of the mapping is actually not public yet. We're happy to share this presentation with the participants today. That's not a problem. We will be giving a broader launch at the beginning of March. And included in that, we'll make available the full list of projects that we've uncovered with the brief summaries, including the information that you saw in this overview for each project. Our hope is that by making it publicly available, we can help people who are undertaking projects or considering doing so draw upon learnings from other projects, but also just improve the broader confidence in undertaking these initiatives, both from the industry side and from the policymaker side. We're going to continue to update the mapping ongoing, and we expect to release one report every half year or so. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions, of course, in the question and answer period. And if you would like to contact me offline, particularly if you'd like to see if your projects were included in the study or would like to provide information about a project, we'd be happy to receive that. As we say, the updates are ongoing. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farnstock, for a very interesting overview and also for being very precise within your 10-minute limit. And then we proceed to the next presentation, which will be from Mr. Benjamin Maluenda Filippi, Head of the Unit for New Energy Carriers, Division for Fuels and Energy Carriers, Ministry of Energy, Chile, to present the National Green Hydrogen Strategy of Chile. Mr. Maluenda Filippi, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. I'm going to share my screen now to show the presentation. Give me 1 second. So I hope I'm going to take as much time as the previous presenter and be within the 10-minute time frame. Today I'm going to show you a couple of key insights from the Chilean green hydrogen strategy that we released by the end of 2020, with a special focus on the implications for the maritime, for the production of maritime clean fuels. Since I am here representing the Ministry of Energy, I'm going to be very focused on the supply side of these clean fuels, so not precisely on the vessels, but actually on the availability and on our projections on the cost of these clean fuels for the next 10, 15 years. So I don't need to explain this to everyone in the audience. This is something that we all know. Energy is at the heart of the climate change challenge. We need to change the way in which we produce and consume energy if we are to curb this rising concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And today I'm going to show you what some of the key efforts of Chile are focused on in changing these production patterns in the energy sector. So Chile is blessed with a lot of renewable resources. Many of you probably know this, as many other countries in the world. The curious thing about Chile is that it's a very remote country with a very small economy relative to other countries. So this potential actually is outmatches whatever consumption potential we might have internally. So this provides a huge opportunity for the production and export of clean fuels that are going to be carrying this renewable energy through the world and are going to enable its use in several applications, not only in Chile, but in a port in Europe, in a bus in China, and who knows what else. So we did a study last year with McKinsey & Company to underpin the national hydrogen strategy we were preparing. And according to their numbers, we have some great projections for cost relating to green hydrogen production. And when you have cheap green hydrogen, you also have cheap green ammonia, cheap green methanol, and cheap synthetic fuels, or at least relatively cheap as to other parts of the world. So by 2030, we will be getting to price levels or to cost levels that are going to be making our green hydrogen fully competitive against gray hydrogen in some conditions. And by 2040 or 2050, our green hydrogen could even be competing against natural gas directly, even without any price on carbon. This is fully fully economic analysis without any price on emissions. And it's not only a very competitive potential, but it's also a very vast potential. So over 160 million tons of green hydrogen could be produced in Chile with the renewable resources that we already have mapped. So this allows for a wide variety of production of clean fuels, not only hydrogen, but other derivatives as well. And as I mentioned before, we do not have the capacity to consume all that clean energy. So we need to export these clean molecules throughout the world. These are some example routes that McKinsey analyzed for us, with some estimations on the landed cost of that green hydrogen in, for example, Japan and Korea, or in the US, comparing a little bit to other potential routes that are already under development. And we're looking not only at the export of green hydrogen in liquid form, but also as, of course, its derivatives, green ammonia, green methanol, and also other green exports. And this has a clear implication for the maritime sector from our point of view, because this green ammonia will not only be consumed in industrial hubs, but also will be delivered to bunkering facilities all over the world, especially in the north of Europe and in the Southeastern Asia and Eastern Asia regions, for its use in the future zero emission vessels that we've heard so much about in this symposium. We've already have an MOU underway with Singapore that's going to be actually signed next week to start exploring these international supply routes. We have several others in discussion with private and public entities in the north of Europe. So we're already working on setting up the channels or the routes through which we will be sending these clean fuels to the consumption centers all over the world, especially with a keen eye on maritime uses. So the potential of this for Chile is huge. Domestically, our leverages for clean hydrogen and green ammonia consumption will be, of course, mining and transportation, which are the biggest energy consumption sectors of Chile. But we also see a huge opportunity for exports, not only for, again, industrial uses, but also for maritime uses all over the world, which is a huge opportunity for the country. So we have set some targets to establish the ambition and align private and public stakeholders, not only in Chile, but overseas as well. We aim by 2030 to be producing the most competitive green hydrogen on the planet, below $1.5 per kilogram, to achieve this competitiveness with gray hydrogen. And to reach that level, we need by 2025 to be developing already 5 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. Not necessarily built, but definitely underway, so that we can be ready by 2030 to supply all the applications that are going to be needing these clean fuels, including shipping. So we're doing a whole bunch of stuff. This year we have 15 projects to support different initiatives in the country. We've gathered them in 4 different axes. I'm going to just give you a key message in each of one. We can go into details in the discussion maybe, but we're working on regulation and permits, especially developing the safety regulation for installations on land. And this includes naturally the ports. So if we are able to put these safety regulations in place for handling, storage, and loading in the port facilities, we're going to be clearing the path for future bunkering activities. We're also working, financing, and giving incentives to projects. We're very focused as a ministry on the supply side. So that's our sector, the energy sector. So we are going to be giving direct funding to projects that are going to be supplying green hydrogen. And we hope that those supports are going to be spilled over to the applications, including, of course, shipping. We are also working in international partnerships, which I already mentioned, and also developing infrastructure and capabilities locally to be able to capture value from this economic growth, to have our workers be involved in the value chain, our innovators, our universities, in partnership with all international stakeholders. And I'm just want to finish with a couple of concrete examples, just to not only speak in terms of targets. This is a project that is already underway. Its environmental permitting is under process. The installations are already have their engineering done, and the equipment are underway. This is the Haruoni plant. This is in the very south of Chile. It's being developed in partnership by Siemens ENAP, which is the national oil company of Chile, Enel, the Italian utility, and there are already 2 off-takers for the project that have signed MOUs, which is Porsche in Germany and Mabanaf as well in Germany. So they're looking to import these green fuels. In this case, it's going to be green methanol and green gasoline into the north of Germany for its use in transport applications, land transport. But of course, this is only the pilot phase. As the additional phases come into play, reaching up to 2 gigawatts approximately of electrolyzer capacity. Of course, this green methanol and green gasoline are going to be used in many more applications, including, of course, for smaller vessels, especially the methanol portion of the production. And we also have an additional 18 projects in the country under development with $12 billion investment. These are all projects. Some are very conceptual still. Some are much more detailed in their development. But some very serious and very, very capable and large and experienced players are pushing these consortiums. So we're very optimistic and very bullish on the development of the supply side of these clean fuels. So I guess the question for the round of discussion is whether the demand is going to be able to get there technologically, regulatorily speaking, to be able to consume these green fuels. And with that thought, I guess I leave the floor to the next presenter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Maluenda Filippi, for a very interesting presentation of what is taking place at the Southern Hemisphere. I have to say, when I saw your opening slide, you reminded me of a personal dream of always going to Chile. So very beautiful. Now let's continue with our presentations, and I will turn to Dr. Jasmine Lam, which is from the Maritime Energy and Sustainable Development Center of Excellence, Singapore, to present her views whether alternative fuels will be ready for shipping to meet its GHG target in 2050. Dr. Lam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Hello, everyone. I think you can see my slides. Okay.
Yes, we can see your slide and now in presentation mode. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Hi, I'm from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, particularly from MESD Center. I'm very glad to share with you on this topic. Will alternative fuels be ready for shipping to meet its GHG target in 2050? In this symposium, we hear a lot about alternative fuels, on how ready they are, and also like what types of technologies and research as well. So I think I'll leave more time on discussion, but not the great details. But as a whole, I think it's good to summarize. In assessing alternative energy or alternative fuels, we need to look at the supply chain. From the left, we can see the generation of alternative fuels and energy. Basically, particularly on the sources, including the supply, the feedstock, not only the current supply, but in view of the IMO targets, which are long-term, that means the potential feedstock as well, including the type, the availability, their usage, and also the production technologies. This is changing and evolving. So that's why, again, it's not just about the current production technologies, but any new technologies among, for example, different countries in terms of the production. And the next is capacity, also the current one and the plan, like for example, the plants worldwide, and also the cost and any other concerns in relation to the fluctuation of the cost, factors affecting the cost, etc. And in the middle, we can see transport and storage. The storage requirements, logistics, safety and regulations, such as whether the alternative fuels are toxic, explosive, the risk level. And on the right-hand side, that's the application on board. The applicability, but it varies across different types of ships, small ships, big ships, container ships, or other types of cargo ships, let's say tankers, bulk carriers. The applicability would not be exactly the same. Also, the operation, safety again, and then also the environment, and emission reduction potential, including GHG and pollutant emission reduction on board, and also from the LCA, that means life cycle assessment perspective. So that's why with that, based on our center's research, we have summarized that how ready the alternative fuels be in terms of the timeline. We group them into the left-hand side, the short to medium term. That means up to 2030. And on the right-hand side, those are the alternative fuels which would be longer term, beyond 2030 up to 2050. So let's take a look. For LNG, basically what we mean is fossil-based, which is a short-term and medium-term solution. And largely speaking, why this is a good candidate? Because of the sufficient supply to support the entire shipping industry. So that's why our perspective is not just about a few companies, but the global shipping industry. However, it's unable to meet on itself the 2050 GHG target. So that's why the next candidate is biodiesel, the first generation and next generation, which is under the short to medium term. The main limitation is because of the land use. Limitation in land use because there is competition with other production as well, but it can be used as a drop-in fuel with diesel. And also the next one is methanol, basically fossil-based and also biomass-based. It can be used as a clean fuel on board for GHG emission reduction. And for longer term, there are other options, which basically because this session is about R&D, that means based on the shorter term solutions, these can further develop into longer term solution with more R&D, like bio-LNG. So the bio-LNG, biomass-based bio-LNG basically is from waste and wastewater, and is able to use as a drop-in fuel again. But that means the main benefit is that it can meet the 2050's GHG target. That's why on top of the fossil-based LNG, this is the longer-term option. And for the next one is biomethanol. Also, it will be able to meet the 2050 target. And then also for biodiesel, it is the third generation biodiesel. But there is a need for R&D for the third generation biodiesel towards a more sustainable solution. So examples are like methane. And the next one is hydrogen. We hear a lot about hydrogen these days. These include non-bio renewable energy-based hydrogen solutions, including ammonia as a carrier, and then also fuel cell and related technologies and solutions. However, this group of alternative fuel also requires renewable, also R&D for mainly speaking for the renewable hydrogen supply chain, and then also the bunkering infrastructure, etc. In addition to the technology itself. Here in our research, we also take a look of the technology readiness, and this particular map will be able to show you the different options. Also, again, we organize according to the source, and here we have the low or zero or carbon neutral source. Bunkering to onboard storage, and then all the way to the onboard vessel. And we analyze according to the technology readiness level, in short, TRL. If it is red, that means the level is lower than 6. Yellow color is 6 to 8. 9 is the highest. which is, that means ready in terms of the technology. You can see the number 9. So that's why accordingly, we have different groups of options in terms of biofuel. So you can see from the source to bunkering and onboard, and then also really onboard application, there are certain options that have the green color in all the 3 parts, or almost close to high level of technology levels. So that's why these are having higher potentials, or they are more ready. How about renewable H2? At the moment or in the near future, we see that there are still some gaps. So that means there are certain parts in the supply chain that are not ready yet, or they are still in TRL 6 to 8, particularly liquefaction or the liquefied hydrogen, regasification. These will require more research. And there are other routes as well on alternative renewable H2 routes. So these 2 are the options. We consider, for example, from carbon capture, and then also even like from pure nitrogen, then producing also ammonia, fuel cell, and these are the different options. So at the moment also there are some should be done in order to make the technology or the alternative fuel ready for the IMO targets. So I've highlighted here this as an example. Okay, of course there are many other options that could be discussed as well, but in view of time, I've selected LNG and bio-LNG because just now, as shared, largely speaking, these sound to be more ready. That's why for example, for stakeholders like ship owners, operators may consider this option. And for research in Singapore and in our center, we have conducted, or we are conducting research in this area as well. So without talking about too much details, but mainly speaking, one important point for adopting LNG and bio-LNG is that there is a requirement of a global network of infrastructure for its application worldwide. That means it's not just about the alternative fuel itself. There should be port infrastructure to support it. Likewise for bio-LNG. Okay, so this is the important thing. And also, I would like to highlight one point, which is also interesting. There is a potential for very massive biomethane production worldwide as well. So these are the key facts based on the research. So here, almost towards the end of my presentation, if you don't know, Singapore actually is the largest bunkering port in the world. We are major transshipment hub. We are also the largest bunkering hub in the world. So that's why alternative fuel and related matters are very crucial for Singapore. So here I would like to share some efforts to pave the way for low carbon options in Singapore, including like LNG. Singapore has started quite long ago already. We have the Singapore LNG terminal, which was started in 2013 and is the first open access multi-user LNG terminal in Asia. And there are many R&D projects ongoing in low carbon fuels, alternative fuels, cleaner fuel options, including living labs for newer technologies, onboard emission measurements, sea trials, etc. And the next one, this is a new point. I would like to bring out also digitalization. It sounds like the forum, we are talking about alternative fuels. So what's the relationship between digitalization, which is also a key hot topic nowadays? So the key point is that digitalization actually helps to improve integrated services and efficiency. And in a way, actually, it can reduce emission. And also particularly in relation to bunkering, Singapore is working on also streamlining the bunkering process and also researching and exploring on digital bunkering process, including, for example, documentation, the whole process being more streamlined, and digital and efficient. So that's why for bunkering or the bunkering of alternative fuels, it may not be only about the technology, the hardware side, but the software side, the process, documentation, standards as well. And then also lastly, just to share that there is a new initiative, Maritime Singapore Green Initiative, with a new focus on decarbonization, with new carbon emissions related incentives, just like encouraging and funding new R&D technology testing, and also encouraging collaborations among research institutions and the industry. So here, because there are so many things to share, but we like to tell our colleagues that in our center, we have some public reports that can be found on our website. And also here, I show you the QR code, or you may just do some Google search. These include all for speaking alternative fuels for international shipping, and some are for hovercraft, or specific fuel types, including, let's say, hydrogen, electrification, and upcoming ones will be like methanol and ammonia in our current projects as well. We would like to share more in the near future. For more information, you are very welcome to visit our center's website, which is shown on this last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lam, for presenting parts of your work. Very interesting. While you were delivering your presentation, I have to say I was thinking about when I've been participating at the SIBCON conference, a huge bunkering conference taking place in Singapore. And I thought, how will the program of that conference look like in 10 years' time? With let's say your analysis on the future bunkering situation in Singapore, it will be quite interesting to see. But I'm sure there will be a continuation of the SIBCON conference in Singapore. Now, let's move to the final presentation today and for the whole symposium. And before we do that, I will remind you that, of course, the Q&A is very important also to have any clarifications to be provided by the presenters. So please use that function. And now we will go to the last presentation. And there will be 3 presenters. I will now invite Ms. Mona Ken, Acting Deputy Director at the UK Department of Transport, to deliver the presentation to discuss the role of the zero carbon fuels in the UK Clean Maritime Plan. And she will deliver that presentation in cooperation with Mr. Ashley Stair and Mr. William Stone of the UK MCA. So Mona Ken, the floor is yours, and we can see your presentation.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And thank you for the invitation to speak today. As ever, we found it a very informative set of discussions at this symposium. We are here today to talk to the UK Clean Maritime Plan. Sorry, Chairman, can I just check? You can see our slides?
We can see your slide, and now we can see it also in presentation mode, so everything is fine.
Great, thank you. So we'd like to talk today about the progress in implementing the UK Clean Maritime Plan, as well as the UK expectations of the IMO's future regulatory framework on alternative fuels. Firstly, a short piece on how the UK Department for Transport and the UK Maritime and Coast Guard Agency fit together, as it is a joint presentation. So very briefly, the UK Department for Transport is, of course, the UK Ministry for all transport policy, including maritime. We lead on the development of strategy and policy on shipping emissions. And the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency is our executive agency and as the UK maritime regulator, with a lot of dedicated technical expertise on future fuels and other emission reduction technologies. I won't linger on this slide, but suffice to say the UK is, of course, committed to going net zero by 2050. The picture on the left shows our proposed carbon budgets and our trajectory to net zero across the whole of the UK economy. And the figure on the right shows domestic shipping emissions on a BAU trajectory and where we need to get to by 2050. So there's a significant challenge and we need a propulsion revolution. In terms of UK policy to take us towards that trajectory of net zero by 2050, our guiding strategy is the Maritime 2050 strategy, which set out a vision of zero emission shipping. We followed this through then in 2019 with the UK Clean Maritime Plan, which was our national action plan under the initial IMO greenhouse gas strategy. Alongside this, we published a substantial body of economic and technical research and made a number of policy commitments, which are by and large now implemented. We recognise, however, that that was a first step and we need to take things further in order to reach net zero. And we will be publishing shortly over the coming months a transport decarbonisation plan, which will be a cross-modal transport plan, but which will again focus on shipping emissions and maritime emissions more generally. Guiding all of the development of this policy is our stakeholder group, the Clean Maritime Council. In terms of how we see the market for alternative fuels developing, as I mentioned before, we published alongside the Clean Maritime Plan some economic and technical research. Shown on screen here is a diagram which articulates a number of scenarios for what the future fuel mix might be for UK shipping. I should say that these are indicative alternative fuel scenarios. We recognise that a number of assumptions went into the generation of these scenarios and the future may in fact look very different. But what we took in terms of key conclusions from this work was that electrification and shore power are going to play an important role, but essentially alternative fuels of a number of types are going to be very important and indeed essential for the decarbonisation of the shipping sector. Ammonia appeared through this set of assumptions to be a particularly important fuel, but as I say, a number of assumptions went into them and we will iterate this work as we go forward and learn about technology and costs. That work is all published on the UK government's website, so please, I would encourage people to take a look. In terms of how we are progressing in order to try and support the commercialisation of these fuels, we just last year announced the launch of a £20 million Clean Maritime demonstration competition, which we will be seeking to open for applications shortly over the coming months. This is a grant funding competition designed to encourage the commercialisation of mid-TRL clean maritime technologies and try to encourage applications from across all of the UK. It's part of a wider government programme for a green industrial revolution, which of course will be very important for a green economic recovery from COVID-19. The intention through this competition is to support feasibility studies and real-world demonstrations. And importantly, for this symposium, it will be open to projects from a range of different fuel types. The final word I wanted to say before I pass to my colleagues at the MCA was that we are also running a number of initiatives targeted at COP26, which do have a bearing on future fuels for the sector. Firstly, our Operation Zero initiative, which seeks to bring together North Sea offshore wind developers and secure commitment to decarbonise their operations and maintenance activities. And the UK Department for Transport has supported that by developing a technology roadmap looking at the decarbonisation options for those operations and maintenance vessels, which we will seek to publish in coming months, and which will, of course, consider the role of alternative fuels. In parallel with that, we have an initiative we're calling the Clydebank Declaration, which seeks to encourage governments across the world to form Clydebank partnerships in which two or more members pledge to work together towards decarbonising a shared shipping route, forming a green corridor, and importantly, helping to stimulate the investment required in providing alternative fuels to decarbonise that route. I would very much encourage anyone that's interested in either of these initiatives to please contact myself or my team. I will now hand over to my colleagues at the MCA.
Thank you, Mona. If you want to move to the next slide. So as already mentioned, the MCA is the UK's maritime regulator, and we operate obviously within a statutory framework set by our Merchant Shipping Act. This reflects the various IMO conventions and other international conventions such as MLC, as well as providing the regulatory framework for our domestic fleet and also some aspects of the inland waterways fleet within the UK. This regulatory framework, if we move on to the next slide, we kind of touch on, as well as the work that's going on within the department, which we're supporting around the technology developments. There is also the regulatory challenge of it supporting the uptake of new technologies. It will be probably a familiar challenge to everyone on this this session that regulation takes time to put in place, and we often find that there's a challenge where the regulatory framework is difficult to keep pace with developments within industry and innovation. As a regulator, we can find ourselves in the place where either we are taking a very permissive approach and we're just letting people get on with new technologies without adequately addressing the risks that are created by these new technologies, or we can flip to the other side and just be a blocker where we go, the rule book says no, and we are standing in the way of development. And we want to make sure that we are finding the balance between those two extremes where we allow technology to move forward. I think the other particular challenge we have, especially around emissions reductions, as has been highlighted by a number of the other presentations, is the range of technologies that we're exploring. We're not just looking at having to incorporate a single new type of fuel into the shipping industry. Actually, there's a whole suite of new fuels and new technologies which we need to accommodate within the regulatory framework, and we need to understand how they will impact and the risks they potentially can create so that we're managing those safely. And I think the pace at which we're also looking for people to take this up, the ambitions and the need for us all to be moving very rapidly to these new solutions to meet the emissions for targets puts a real pressure on us as regulators to do our piece. And now I'll hand over to Ashley, who will talk about some of the ways that we're responding to that challenge as an organisation.
Thank you very much, Gwilym. Next slide, please, Mona. So what this is really about, what have we done specifically in this area from the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency perspective? We formed a dedicated team in response to some of the commitments that we made in the CMP and building on those further, called the Maritime Future Technologies team. We've built, as part of that, internal technical capacity and also a structure recognising that we can't have all of the capacity and capability internally to be able to support external input into that thinking. A key part of this team is that we don't have any regulatory approval function, so we obviously sit very closely alongside the regulatory function in the MCA, but a very important factor is we don't, as a team, have any regulatory approval function. We've structured ourselves to be dynamic, fast-paced and collaborative, reflecting the pace of change in industry, and we've got a primary focus, as mentioned, on emission reduction, but also on the autonomy agenda as well. Next slide, please. Primarily what we're looking to do as a team could be summarised in three main functions. So we recognise that innovation is moving at such a pace that, as Gwilym has mentioned, that regulation is not able to keep pace. So we need to be able to respond to that in a subtly different way. And to be able to do that, we're looking to facilitate projects on a case-by-case basis, maybe using slightly more permissive means and safety case approaches, using the mechanisms that we have within existing regulations. And a big part of that is ensuring that we introduce consistency in how we're dealing with those projects and making sure as a regulator we have the assurance that those projects are safe. We're also then looking to take that learning and move into the second function, which is about how we support regulatory change. So that can be updating the current regulatory framework, but also looking at what the future needs of that regulatory framework might be, both on a domestic and on an international level. And those two functions sit across both of the emission reduction and the autonomy space. And the third and final function of the team is really about influencing change. And this is really a thought leadership piece going over and above our obligation as a regulator, acting as a centre of expertise and providing informed opinion from an evidence-based, unbiased perspective on the future of the technologies and driving the convergence conversation on fewer technologies. So that's a kind of high-level overview of some of the areas that we've done and we've implemented, building on some of the commitments in the Clean Maritime Plan. I'll hand back to yourself, Morna, if you've got anything else to add to that at the end.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Ashley and Gwilym. I think that concludes our presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for providing insight into the UK Clean Maritime Plan and how you have organized it and what you plan to do in the follow-up. It will be very interesting to follow you in the coming years. Now we will move into the Q&A section, and I suggest we do it as we previously have done. I turn to the Secretariat to present to us some of the questions which is posed in the Q&A function, and Mr. Hondas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and also for this group of panelists in the last block of our symposium, and big thanks for your very informative presentations. I think it was very good to see the different opportunities that lie into the energy transition for states. And that, of course, is something that's very important for IMO and the work looking forward. Thanks to the UK for, as per usual practice, closing the interventions. We like to stick to that also in this symposium. Again, we have received and we've seen many questions posed both in the Zoom meeting as well as in the YouTube chat, and we've seen that quite a number of those questions have already been answered by the panelists. But let me put a couple of more questions to our panelists. Let me start by Professor Schäfer. A question from YouTube, particularly in relation to evaluating and your study on evaluating the different alternatives. How did you consider the energy content of the different alternative fuels? Because this wasn't entirely clear from the graphs in your presentation. There's also a question about how to ensure, and this is also for Professor Schäfer, how to ensure that life cycle assessment guidelines are consistent between the different international fora such as IMO, IPCC, UNFCCC, so that the life cycle assessment calculation of greenhouse gases of the different alternative fuels are harmonized among these different fora. To Jesse Farnstock of the Getting to Zero Coalition, we've seen questions in the chat, particularly about public funding, which was highlighted on your slides as an important driver to the various initiatives that you presented. Do you think the transition really depends on public funding? And depending on your question, can you highlight a little bit more what your views are on opportunities for developing countries in alternative renewable fuel projection? To Mr. Maluenda, thanks and good to see the Ministry of Energy being represented today here. We've received a question also on the YouTube channel about water use, particularly about the production of renewable hydrogen in Chile, and whether your national strategy foresees something specifically about water use. Do you, for instance, also use seawater that is being desalinized? And how is the GHG or the CO2 emissions related to the desalination process taken up? And another question posed by Mr. Costa from Brazil. We all know that Chile has a very long coastline. And how do you deal with the internal logistics of the distributions of new fuels among the different ports? To Dr. Lam, we have a specific question about the safety adaptations. So you highlighted the different fuels being used or being considered by Singapore. So how do you ensure that safety adaptations are made in time? And another question from the YouTube channel relates particularly to the TRL, so to the technical readiness, but how, and this was something that seemed to be missing in your presentation, if you could elaborate on the commercial readiness of the alternative. So what does Singapore consider as the first commercially ready alternative fuels? And then finally for the UK, you mentioned in your presentation influencing change, and you presented your national action plan on clean, the UK Clean Maritime Plan. Can you say something how the national action plan led to kind of an acceleration of efforts by the private sector, or highlight what the link is between the national maritime plan and the private sector, and how you see that such plans can steer private sector development? Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I hope that will give some more food for discussion. Back to you.
Thank you, absolutely, Mr. Hondas, and thank you to those who have posed those questions. And we now have 20 minutes to reply to them all together. So we will then just start by turning to Professor Schäfer to respond to the question. Professor Schäfer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to very briefly respond to the two questions. The first one about energy content. As I said before, because this is part of a much broader study, we have taken into consideration the different energy content of the different fuels. And because we have been using this in our integrated assessment model, all technologies, all engine efficiencies, everything is being taken into account, including storage space, etc., etc. So energy content has been properly taken into account for the different fuels. About how to ensure that life cycle analysis is competitive with other analysis. So basically we have followed the IPCC, let's say, rules. I'm a member of the IPCC for more than 20 years by now. So basically we have made an inventory of all greenhouse gases. And by convention, we have adopted the GWP-100 to convert everything into CO2 equivalent. But I don't want to go into this discussion because there are many conventions possible. GWP-20, as was mentioned before, dynamic or static GWP, GTP, GWP star. So there are many conventions, but basically we are following the IPCC convention of translating all CO2 or all emissions into CO2 equivalent using GWP-100. But again, it's very easy to use any convention to give different results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Schäfer. Now I will turn to Mr. Farnstock to respond to the two questions posed to him. Mr. Farnstock, please.
Yes, thank you. With respect to public funding, the question of whether the transition really depends on public funding, I would say that it's a pretty well-established truth that the valley of death exists, and that overcoming the disadvantages for early action in capital-intensive and risky sectors often relies on public support. So I do think it's going to play an important role. That role may vary from context to context, of course, and from technology to technology, but I think it's going to be important. And I think one of the roles of these concept studies and pilots that we're looking at is to help identify what kind of funding and support is important. So I think that we should see these demonstrations as playing a dual role, both demonstrating technology, but also demonstrating where the gaps are in terms of the economics. In terms of the opportunities for developing countries, that's an important question. I mean, obviously, the position of the country geographically in relation to global shipping routes is relevant, but I think the key factor, the overwhelmingly key factor is probably the renewable energy resource for fuel production. We saw in the presentation from Chile what a difference maker it's been for a more advanced country. So I think for a country at an earlier stage of development, it's even more important. Getting to zero coalition is actually looking at these opportunities in partnership with the World Bank and a few others, and we've been in conversations with Morocco, Indonesia, and as well as slightly more developed economies around exploring these opportunities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farnstock, for those replies. Now let us turn to Mr. Benjamin Maluenda Filippi to respond to the questions posed to him. Maluenda Filippi.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to do a very short answer to both questions. So the first one was on regarding water use. So we are very optimistic on the availability of water for these projects. We all know that hydrogen requires about 10 liters per kilo, up to 20, depending on the exact production pathway. So that has a very low impact on cost. Even we have done some calculations with consultants and getting numbers from the private companies, and the cost of desalinating water impacts up to 1% the cost of the final kilo of green hydrogen. So it's a very, very low impact on the cost. So that's a very positive news. The amount is also not very large. We've done another simple calculation, and you can see that with less than 1% of what water the mining sector uses today, you could replace the whole consumption of diesel in that sector. So again, the quantity is not as much as you would think. And the third issue, which is sustainability and the emissions of that produced water, which is part of the life cycle emissions of the clean fuel. We're also very optimistic because our desalination facilities are even today powered fully by renewable power, so they are not powered by dirty electricity. There are, of course, many issues regarding the disposal of brine in the local environments, and we're working on that with the Ministry of Environment. But regarding at least cost and life cycle emissions, we're very, very optimistic. And regarding the question was regarding distribution and the ports and the availability of fuels along the coast. We see clearly two production poles emerging, one in the north and one in the very, very south. And again, as Chile has very little traffic compared with other industrialized nations, we do see that our opportunity is actually exporting these clean fuels to bunkering centers all over the world, especially Southeast Asia and the north of Europe, for its distribution over there. That of course does not rule out that our own mining companies, for example, are looking very strongly to partner with shipping companies that are willing to adopt clean vessels, because that will help them deliver their minerals to markets in Asia and in Europe and North America with a lower carbon footprint. So that's also part of their future business model that is focusing on sustainability as well. So there are many issues to the question, but I guess those two aspects are worth noting.
Thank you very much for your response to the questions, and we now turn to Dr. Lam in Singapore to provide her reply to the questions posed. Dr. Lam, please.
Thanks for the questions. The first one is about safety adaptations. This is definitely very important. In my view, there are two key parts on top of the technology or the technical aspect of alternative fuels. First is about the system level standard operating procedure. That means any particular parties or stakeholders, operators who would like to use alternative fuels, definitely there should be a new system level operating procedure in order to fit the particular alternative fuel. It would not be the same as the bunker that we use at the moment. Secondly, I think that's about training, the manpower, the people aspect, because for alternative fuels, there are many characteristics that are different from the current fuels. That's why you need training, and people have to be aware of the risk, the safety, and they have to be very well trained. Another question is about commercial readiness. Yes, this is also a key. I have mentioned also about, for example, cost and logistics, storage. These are the matters related to commercial readiness. Based on our analysis, relatively speaking, also LNG, the biodiesel as a drop-in, and methanol in terms of the fossil-based methanol would be more ready in the short to medium term. For example, for hydrogen, because of the storage, because of the high cost, especially for example, fuel cell, these would have very high GHG reduction potential, but just in terms of the commercial readiness, this would be a long-term solution. This is in line to our analysis of the technology readiness as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lam, for your response. And I will now turn to the United Kingdom and Ms. Mona Cannon to respond to the question put forward to the UK presentation. Ms. Cannon, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for the question. It's a really interesting question. I think it's clear to us in the UK that key to stimulating private investment in this space will be the provision of certainty to the market. So here we think that the role of national action plans in general under the IMO initial strategy and then the Clean Maritime Plan in the UK as our national action plan, these are really important vehicles to give this certainty that member states are committed to the targets set out in the strategy. And in the UK, our Clean Maritime Plan helped give certainty by affirming that the UK is committed to taking UK shipping emissions to net zero. But of course, 2050 is a reasonable distance out, and we recognise that the market needs further certainty around the costs of emission reduction technologies in order to be able to invest. That's why our Clean Maritime Plan set out some initial capital support to trigger innovation activities. That will, of course, contribute to global efforts to demonstrate emission reduction technologies and then reduce technology uncertainty. But that said, again, we realise that it's still a very uncertain market. There's still a lot of technology uncertainty around the technologies on board, and there's still a need for a significant amount of investment in the onshore infrastructure to support those technologies. That's why we realise there's further work to do and we need to go farther than the Clean Maritime Plan, and we will seek to do that in our transport decarbonisation plan, where in the process of finalising that document and considering the best policy levers to use. But I think it's interesting to see, for instance, what's happening on a regional basis within the EU around the emissions trading scheme and where other regions and countries might go with sort of economic instruments in that space. That's probably all I would say on that point, but I will just hand to my colleague Ashley Stair to ask if you have any further reflections.
Yeah, I guess just from the influencing change piece, expanding on that, I think really what we're looking to do is understand the technology routes from that unbiased and holistic perspective, and really understand the barriers to adoption and the gaps in knowledge that we currently have to focus our efforts where it really counts, and progress those areas. And that will allow us to inform through the MCA, through our wider cross-government relationships, but also wider across industry as well. So I think I'll just add that in terms of what we're looking to do in influencing change. There's on the one hand the safe implementation through the regulatory framework, but it's also understanding the technologies and where the barriers to adoption are and where the gaps in knowledge are currently, and focusing our efforts.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stair and Ms. Ken, for the reply to those questions. And now we are coming closer to finalizing this symposium, and at least this block of presentations. I would just say that again, we have received extremely useful insight from the panel on the prospects for alternative sustainable fuels, and I have taken many notes regarding your presentations, and also quite interesting follow-up discussion relating to the questions, and as previously informed, the Secretariat will also provide responses in writing to the questions posed. Now, before I provide my final observations on these 2 days, I would now like to turn to the Secretariat to provide final comment from the Secretariat side, meaning the Director of the Marine Environment Division, Mr. Hiroyuki Yamada, to provide a final remark from the Secretariat side. Mr. Yamada, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon to all participants from London. On behalf of the Secretary General, thank you very much, Mr. Svein Oftedal of Norway, for moderating this symposium, and of course all presenters. We hope the symposium was informative and useful to all of us. Looking back at interesting presentations, I am very pleased to witness a lot of initiatives and good progress on various alternative fuels and technologies. We believe these initiatives and projects will continue to spread and accelerate. At the same time, we have noted gaps, that is, the complexity and difficulty of promoting the uptake and availability of alternative low and zero carbon marine fuels. Partnerships among stakeholders, together with clear policy and international regulations, seem to be key factors in advancing towards decarbonization of international shipping. I am aware that IMO should play an active role as the global regulator and also as a promoter and a coordinator. More specifically, I have noted interesting takeaways as the outcome of this symposium, which may guide our future policy work. In particular, the need to expedite the discussion on the development of guidelines on life cycle carbon intensity for all types of marine fuels, which is already on IMO's agenda. And second, the importance of address more safety consideration, for instance, related to design and building of ships, safe handling and onboard storage, and associated crew training. IMO's IGF code, as many people mentioned, under SOLAS Convention, will play an important role in this area. And the importance of further promoting the ship-to-shore interface, which is crucial to develop the necessary infrastructure for renewable marine fuels in ports areas and safe bunkering of alternative fuels. IMO stands ready to continue to be a global platform for knowledge sharing and promoting alternative fuels. We plan to hold a series of events, including those possibly at COP26 this year. We should not forget that the energy transition of shipping has both sides, a necessity and an opportunity. Shipping decarbonization is everyone's business, and cooperation across the maritime community and beyond would be essential to success. Finally, I thank you all participants through Zoom as well as IMO's YouTube channel, which attracted many people. I also appreciate dedicated efforts by the MED GHG team, Rule, Camille, and other staff under the supervision by Tian Bin, as well as our colleagues in the Secretariat, particularly ICT team. I wish you all keeping healthy and see you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yamada, and for this final and very promising statement on from your side. Please now allow me to provide some final remarks, and I have really enjoyed being a moderator for this important symposium. And this is not a kind of final remark I have written in advance, so I need to look into my notes. And the first thing I've been writing in my notes is that this symposium, it's no longer a kind of academic symposium with theoretically based opportunities and challenges. Actually now this symposium has identified that the input have been based on real experiences, real work, real challenges being worked on, meaning that we have now had a symposium which is identifying that the application of other energy sources within the maritime arena is taking place, and that all players are actively working on it. Clearly, it's a kind of we are at the start of something. So the presentation showed that, but now the presentations demonstrate that we have experience gained already, and that is extremely important in order to resolve the challenges. The second point I have noted is that the maritime part of it, maritime transportation, is a part of a larger energy transition which is ongoing globally. And we have noted that several countries have presented they have strategies in relation to an energy transition, that there are various activities going on in the whole value chain of energy, and meaning that in observing that, we have also observed that there may be also opportunities for many countries, and of course challenges for many countries, and especially developing countries will also be faced with these opportunities and challenges. Now, therefore, also at the work of the IMO, it is extremely important to face this challenge also in relation to financing the introduction of alternative fuels into shipping. And therefore, I'm very pleased that it is actually active work ongoing at the IMO on this. We have now recently had the initiative FinSmart, which brings together public and private banks to overcome barriers to finance, particularly in developing countries, to ensure all IMO member states can effectively implement the organization's initial GHG strategy. And I'm sure that this is one element of this energy transition we will need to, let's say, be more actively involved with. Now, the symposium provided a lot of input on technical challenges and technical, let's say, opportunities, operational challenges, operational opportunities, logistics, economics, and also the complexity of bringing all relevant players to cooperate and bringing them all relevant players together in order to all have this transition to be undertaken successfully. Several presentations have been providing useful insight into how this has been taking on in various projects. It is also identified that for the IMO as an organization, there are a lot to dig into. Now, clearly in the ongoing negotiations on how to further follow up on the initial GHG strategy and mechanism for emission reductions, that is one element, of course. But the other thing is that for the IMO, of course, the safety aspects of various types of fuels, and all types of fuel, will be of utmost importance. How can we develop standards? How can we develop, let's say, the proper interface between ship and port? Extremely important in order to have a successful transition in all parts of the world. a lot of useful insight into this aspect has been presented at this symposium. But clearly, there will be a lot of follow-up tasks for the IMO when new fuels are to be more used by shipping. Now, this is not a kind of concluding remark, because I think there will be a follow-up of this. One thing is, of course, there will be a follow-up at the relevant IMO committees, but hopefully there will be follow-up symposium to be taking place at the IMO, because the developments are taking place very fast and increasingly at an increasingly higher speed. Now, before I conclude, I want again to thank the presenters. We have had 4 blocks with extremely interesting presentations. Thank you very much for providing your insight into those topics to us. I would like to thank all participants for their active participation with questions. And I will also again thank the Secretary General for his great initiative to organize this symposium. It has been timely, and the Secretary General has shown clear leadership in organizing this. And of course, this could never ever have happened without the fantastic planning and execution by the Marine Environment Division of the Secretariat of the IMO. Clearly, the staff involved have been doing a fantastic job in organizing the program presentations. So, as always, I want to express my sincere appreciation to the Secretariat, the staff of the MED, to facilitate the whole symposium. It has been very interesting for me as a moderator, and now I think also we have managed to conclude on time. So by that, I would say thank you for your participation, and stay well and healthy and safe, and we will soon meet again. Thank you very much.